Thanks for having me today. My name is Suzanne Olyarnik. I serve as the director of the Bodega Marine Reserve, which is the location of the Bodega Marine Laboratory out on Bodega Head. And our site is administered by University of California, Davis. I'm also a UC Davis alum. I did my dissertation work out of Bodega Marine Reserve. So I've been in the area for a long time, since about 2001. And I've been serving as the director there since 2010. So I've been out on the head for a long time. I recognize some familiar names here today. So thanks again for having me, and thank you guys being here today. I'm going to give you an overview of the Bodega Marine Reserve and Bodega Marine Laboratory. And then in the second half of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sonoma Marine Protected Areas Collaborative. And it's always nice for me to start to know who has been out to Bodega Marine Reserve and Laboratory. Can I maybe see a show of hands, or maybe give me a hand up if you've been out there before? So quite a few people. That's great. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get to my slides here. Did that work? Can everybody see those?
Looks great.
Okay. So here is a beautiful area of Bodega Head, and you can see the laboratories there. And I'll show you another aerial overview in just a little bit that shows you what the boundaries of the reserve are. For those of you, let's see if I can get my slides to, there we go. For those of you who have spent time out on Bodega Head, and who maybe haven't been to the lab or the reserve, you've probably at least seen some of these ecological reserve signs. And you may have been wondering what mysterious things are going on behind the fences out there. You might have heard, rumors about some secret experiments, or the world's best surf spot that's keeping quiet, or maybe private parties on the beach. But in reality, what's going on out there is more things like a lot of nerdy people looking carefully at things and counting things. So hopefully today, the information I'm going to share with you will dispel any rumors or any questions that you've had about sort of what goes on behind the gates and the fences. I always like to start my talks with a map so that we're all geographically located. I know that you guys all know where Bodega Head is, and the Bodega Marine Lab and the Reserve are located out here on Bodega Head. It's nice to think about, our location in relation to University of California, Davis. We are about 2 hours by car to Davis. We're also, very close to the mouth of the San Francisco Bay. We're very close to Point Reyes. So all of these things come into play in terms of the research and other activities that go on at our site. A lot of people ask, 2 hours inland, what the heck is UC Davis doing with a marine laboratory on the coast? And I like to just highlight that UC Davis really has extensive programs in ecology, environmental science, biology, and many other disciplines that really bring a lot of strength to understanding and problem solving for our coast. UC Davis has administered the lab and the reserve since 1983. Before that, it was run by UC Berkeley. And UC Davis now, because of the work that's built up so much at the laboratory, UC Davis now has a Coastal Marine Sciences Institute on the campus that includes Bodega Marine Laboratory. And they have developed a really unique cross-disciplinary major in the marine and coastal sciences. So we are just starting to graduate some of the first undergraduates to come through that program, and that's really exciting. And we also have many different graduate programs on the campus whose students study coastal topics and who make use of Bodega Marine Laboratory and Reserve. So UC Davis has a lot going on and a lot of programs that relate to our coastal environment out here in Bodega. So zooming in on Bodega Head here, you can see that these are this marks the boundaries of Bodega Marine Reserve. And you can see that the reserve encompasses a lot of different habitats. I really like to look at this view because you can really see that, we have intertidal coastline that draws from researchers, this, more protected beach. We have some exposed beach out here at Salmon Creek Beach. We also have mudflats and are adjacent to interesting seagrass habitats out here in Bodega Harbor. We have extensive dune areas, strand area, back dune, these dunes that have a lot of Ammophila on them. We also help to manage some portions that have really beautiful native dune communities out here. So we and of course there's lots of coastal prairie and coastal bluff habitat too. So we have, even though it's not one of the larger reserves in the system, we have a high diversity of habitats that draw both marine researchers, but also terrestrial researchers to come out and do research. I also wanted to point out from this view that, we are neighbors to both the north and the south are California state parks. So, the Bodega Head has it's a very large corridor of protected area. And it's really nice for us that we have state parks on either side, because not only does it provide more of that corridor, but it provides very similar habitats to what we have on the reserve, but that are protected for recreational purposes. And of course, on the Bodega Marine Reserve, we're much more focused on research and education as our mission. So it's nice for us to be able to say to folks who do want to come in on our reserve, which is not one of the approved uses, we can refer them to the state parks area nearby that has many of the same habitats that we have, where they can do that recreation. So here's a slide that shows our mission. It's to contribute to the understanding and the wise stewardship of the earth and its natural systems by supporting university level teaching, research, and public service at protected natural areas throughout California. And you'll notice that I'm putting emphasis on the research education factors in that mission, because it separates us from something like state parks, which is more recreationally based. So the other interesting thing about Bodega Marine Reserve, that it's part of a California-wide system of natural reserves called the UC Natural Reserve System. We have 41 sites across the state of California that belong to this system, and it protects over 750,000 acres of California habitat, specifically for research and education. And that distinction is really important, because it can be very difficult for researchers to get approval to do research projects on other types of protected land or on private land. So it can be very hard to get projects on state parks land, for example, or county parks land or other protected areas. So to have these particular sites set aside across all these different ecosystems of California is really important for research. And for classes to be able to go out, and for us to put instruments that stay out on a long-term basis and collect data over decades. So it's really important that we have carved out that niche of protecting land specifically for research and education. The idea of the natural reserve system, which was started in the mid-1960s, was that we were going to encompass samples of all of the major ecosystems of California into the system, so that we have protected those areas for research and education. And we're getting pretty close to that. We still have some room to grow and some other ecosystems that we want to encompass, but you can see that we really do span from pretty far north in the state all the way down to the southern border, and then several locations along the coast all the way over to the Eastern Sierra. So we're doing a pretty good job of having sites that encompass a lot of California's ecosystems. And these reserves specifically are for research, teaching, and outreach. I've already mentioned that. We want to keep them in very good quality condition so that the research is very relevant. They're protected from development. They provide secure sites for research. They end up being these hubs of knowledge. So researchers come, they might be studying very different things, but in these smaller reserves places, they interact a lot more than they might encounter each other on a big campus with lots of different people. So they're also really good places where people kind of cross-pollinate ideas or share what they're doing in a smaller setting, so they can start thinking creatively about how their different pieces that they're working on might actually be relevant to each other, or they might learn how to do different techniques from each other that they, if they were on a big campus somewhere, they wouldn't interact with each other so closely. And they're also places that generate a lot of research information, a lot of data, a lot of results, and they build up over time, like at Bodega, and that becomes really a hub of knowledge and a hot spot for lots of new collaborations, new discoveries, because there's so much information coming out of these places. There are also areas that are managed, because we're keeping these habitats in good quality condition. There are places where stewardship practices are developed and improved. And we work a lot to engage with our land managers, with agencies or other protected areas around us, or even private landowners, to help share some of those management strategies and learn from each other. And something that's really important about these places is that they're safe places where students come and feel the impact and the motivation and the energy of learning outside, and that's so much more impactful than what you can do inside a classroom or a laboratory. And Bodega Marine Reserve specifically, we've had very long-term meteorological, oceanographic, water quality, and population data sets that are ongoing. So we've built up a lot of data and a lot of knowledge over time. We do photo monitoring of phenology and other things. We have GIS information. We provide natural history collections. We have an herbarium and an algal collection on site. We have samples of lots of invertebrates and other things as well. We have a lot of natural history knowledge that's built up at our site over time. And we provide this wonderful outdoor living classroom for students to come and have hands-on learning. They get to work with professors in very small groups. They have high mentorships. They get to be out and stimulated by looking at things, making observations, forming hypotheses, testing, collecting data that's going to test the hypothesis themselves, coming to conclusions, learning how to present that data in both, in front of their peers, but also write that up for scientific journals. So it's just wonderful hands-on learning, and students learning how to do science by actually doing it and being walked through in a highly mentored environment. It's also a place that we provide security. We have a lot of expensive instruments that are out there to take data, and science is moving more and more in that direction. So we provide that security where we can say, you can put this instrument out there and leave it out there to collect the data, and we know that it's going to be safe there. It's not going to get either intentionally or accidentally vandalized. It's not going to get trampled. It's going to be there when you come back to collect your data. And, it's a hot spot. Bodega Marine Laboratory opened in 1965, and we've been accumulating data in the Bodega Head region for even longer than that. So it's a place where we've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and we can springboard other researchers to do more discovery based on that base of knowledge. And it's not just one site either. Bodega Marine Reserve and Laboratory, they really provide a jumping off place for researchers to come. We have housing that they can stay in there. We have laboratory facilities there. But the researchers that do come and use the site, they work in many places in the larger region. And as we know of our coast, on our north central coast, not all sites are the same here. There's lots of sites where you can't get down to. You might have to, if you're looking for a comparison site, you might have to go a long way up the coast to find another rocky cove that you can access safely to do data collection. So we really serve a large area for researchers to come and use in our north central location. It's also really important because we're within this upwelling zone. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. And it's really powerful to have our reserve and these other sites adjacent to where you have a marine laboratory, because you can bring organisms back and you can do more controlled studies in the laboratory, as well as have access to the protected area just outside the reserve. Okay, so here's another aerial overview of Bodega Head. I like this one too because it helps to show more of that habitat diversity. And another really interesting thing about the Bodega Marine Reserve and this area in general is, of course, that we have the San Andreas Fault Zone that comes through this area. We have the North American Plate where our town is. We're out here on the Pacific Plate on Bodega Head. And of course, this makes for a really interesting geology because you have the two different base rocks out there. And we know that Bodega Head, which is on the same Pacific Plate that of California, like Point Reyes is on, is still moving in the northwest direction because we have a GPS base station located on the reserve that tracks the movement of those tectonic plates. So we know that we're still in motion and still moving northwestward about 2 inches a year. Here's a picture of that plate boundary observatory that UNAVCO maintains on our site that tracks those tectonic plates. So I'm going to go through just a quick few photos to show you some of the habitats I like to highlight. We have extensive rocky intertidal zone that's accessible along Bodega Marine Reserve. And that's really important because a lot of parts in California you can't get down to safely. So the rocky intertidal bench that we have out here is safe for researchers to come and work, and we have areas that are in the cove that are even more safe if you want to bring like undergraduate classes or high school groups out. They can access these areas carefully, and really these rocky intertidal areas have been protected since the early 1960s. They are in beautiful shape. They have an amazing biodiversity out here, so that attracts a lot of research interest at Bodega Marine Reserve. We also have exposed sandy beach, protected sandy beach. We have the dune system, both with a lot of areas that have been planted with Ammophila, but also some of those areas that I said which have maintained their native plant diversity. We have a freshwater wetland on site, as well as a brackish water marsh, coastal prairie and bluff. This is the coastal prairie in springtime. I'm hoping that our coastal prairie is going to look a lot like this year after all the rain that we've had. And then those mudflat habitats out in the harbor, we actually have a lease with Sonoma County. It just renewed it actually after our initial 50 years of the lease. We went into a new agreement for the next 25 years. And these mudflat areas are really important. As we know, we're seeing more and more folks coming up to our area for clamming. And so having some area in the harbor that's protected from that, as protected as we can be right now, is really important because that provides a comparison to the other mudflat areas in the harbor to kind of keep track of how much impact clamming may be having. So we have a number of researchers that come out here and do work in the mudflat areas. And I'm sure a lot of you folks know this, but those mudflats look pretty dull and boring. But if you dig down into those mudflats, there's a lot of life in those sediments. So it's a very interesting place to do research. We also are adjacent to some of the eelgrass meadows. This habitat, this is the what I did my dissertation research on when I came to Bodega back in 2001. I worked, and a lot of the folks in my lab were doing eelgrass research. So there's been sort of a big surge in the amount of eelgrass research that's happened at Bodega over the last couple of decades, and that's still ongoing. Eelgrass is a really important foundation species. It provides a lot of nursery habitat for things. So keeping those meadows in good quality is really important for a lot of our commercially important species, as well as a lot of other things that live out there in Bodega Harbor. So it's not just my opinion that these areas around Bodega Head are really important. They've been recognized as having a lot of importance for a lot of different things. So there's many layers of protection in our waters along our shoreline. The orange you see, this area is the Bodega Marine Life Refuge. That was actually protected in the mid-1960s. What happened was the folks that established the laboratory out there decided that we really needed to protect the rocky intertidal and subtidal areas adjacent to the laboratory from harvesting. So they went to the California legislature and said, hey, can we get this area protected? And they basically took the UC property boundaries and shot them offshore about 1,000 feet and said, okay, we're going to declare this the Bodega Marine Life Refuge. It was originally protected against invertebrate and kelp collecting, and then they layered on protecting against fish harvesting as well. So that's been protected since the 1960s. And let me tell you, I've actually, early on in my career, I got to do some scuba diving out on that reef. And it is amazing, the diversity on that subtidal reef out there. It's just so beautiful and so rich with life. And then as part of the Marine Life Protection Act, and when the marine protected areas were established along the coast of California, the Bodega Head State Marine Reserve was put into place, which is the blue area. And that goes out 3 nautical miles. It protects, a greater swath of our coast. And then it's adjacent to the Bodega Head State Marine Conservation Area, which has allows for a little bit of take. I think finfish by troll, and then squid by dip net. So the green area allows for a little bit of harvesting, but not a whole lot. So these areas are protected because of the rich biodiversity that's out there. And why so much biodiversity? Well, our stretch of the California coast is within one of the upwelling zones. There are only 4 of those zones across the world, and here they're shown: the California in the northern hemisphere, Humboldt in the southern hemisphere, and then over in the Atlantic, we have the Canary area and the Benguela in the north and the south. And this is because of the way the Earth rotates and the dominant direction of the winds, and those two things combined cause, at certain times of the year when the wind blows a lot, like in our springtime right about now, we get these northwest winds that blow consistently for days and days, and that combined with the way the Earth is turning on its axis causes the surface water to get pushed offshore, and that allows this nutrient-rich water to get to upwell, to come up to the surface within the photic zone, which means that the light can shine down, and with the nutrients in the water, it fuels this phytoplankton growth. And of course, the phytoplankton is the base of the food web in the ocean. So that fuels the zooplankton, and that goes on up the food web. And that's what makes this such a rich and productive area. We have,
Suzanne, there was a quick question on the last slide. Yeah. If you could show where the reef is.
Sorry. The reef? In this slide, Justin?
That was the question, yeah.
So this is sort of a generic model. The continental shelf area would be where you might find reef, but it really depends on what stretch of the coast you're talking about. On our coast, we have a reef that goes out here a little ways, and then it drops off to sandy bottom right off of our shore of Bodega Marine Reserve. But this is meant to be just a general model of how upwelling works. Does that make sense?
I think she might have been referring to the map that you showed 1 or 2 slides back, Suzanne.
Here?
Yeah, there.
Yeah,
right?
so the reef out here, the subtidal reef, goes out along, basically, if you can see rocks at the surface at low tide, that's where the reef goes out. It drops off, I don't know how to describe it. It drops off pretty quickly into sand out here off that rocky reef. The other thing that is often a good indicator of where the reef is off of our shore, right, is where you see kelp fronds at the surface in the fall, because kelp will attach to rock. So if you see kelp at the surface, that means there's rock at the bottom. And if you, now, of course, we're having lots of problems with kelp beds. So if you don't see kelp, it's not a true indicator that there's only sand out there. It might be that the kelp bed is not very healthy. But if you do see kelp at the surface, you know there's rock at the bottom. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So in thinking about upwelling, we have a lot of instruments at Bodega Marine Reserve that measure things related to upwelling, right? So we have sensors that look at the ocean currents, how fast they're moving, what they contain. How much fluorescence is an indicator. It's a sort of proxy for how much phytoplankton and other plankton are in the water. We have a high frequency radar system on land, right on our bluff edge, the CODAR system that actually sends signal out over the water. And depending on the return of that signal, they can track the velocity and direction of our sea surface currents. And that's really important for things like, if you're an organism that spawns into the water or that sends your young out into the water as larvae, then those currents could have a lot to do with where your young end up, right? So it could mean that depending on if they're interacting with the water columns, they could be taken hundreds of kilometers south or hundreds of kilometers out offshore, or they can do things that help them stay within a very close area within the coastal area. So it has a lot of impact on population. When people are studying population dynamics of a lot of marine organisms, they need to know where the currents are going. What are the currents doing? The fishing community uses our information from the CODAR system a lot. And actually, let's see what I have next. Actually, the other thing that it tracks is if there's pollutants in the water, right? If there are pollutants moving in and trained in the water currents, we want to know where those pollutants are moving. And our current Marine Lab director, John Largier, he studies oceanography, and he looks a lot at, are there times when we're actually seeing some pollutants coming out of San Francisco Bay when upwelling has been relaxed and water is flowing north along our shoreline? He's actually detected San Francisco Bay water making it all the way up to Bodega Bay. And that's important for us to know, because we have all these really important protections along our coast for the diversity of our organisms and the productivity of our fisheries and things like that. So if there are times when we're seeing influence of pollutants from San Francisco Bay, we want to know that. That data was also used to argue for the extension of the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. They had been proposing some oil and gas development northwest of our location on Bodega Head, and we, some folks from the lab, including John Largier and Dr. Susan Williams, they took that data and said, look, if that development goes in and then there's an accident, which often happens with oil and gas development, and there's an oil spill, that oil will be directly delivered to our important biologically productive areas. So we can't allow that to happen. We have to protect against that. And that's one of the justifications for expansion of the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary that happened a few years ago. So a lot of interesting uses, some very arcane research, really academic research, but also a lot of applied, very important use of the data that's collected out of Bodega Marine Reserve. This is just a nice overview of a number of different sensors that we have out there on the reserve. Reason why, it's important to have this as only a restricted access area is because we have a number of different instruments out there. We actually host some instruments for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We have a climate reference network out here on the head that overlooks Salmon Creek Beach. We have one of their meteorological stations, which is paired with Earth Systems Research Lab Wind Profiler. This is the system that's helping them get a lot better at predicting our big atmospheric river events for flooding and other things along our coast. So they use data from those two. We have a couple of other weather stations on site. We have a lot of, we're taking a lot of data on the ocean water. We need to know if there's going to be a low oxygen event. We need to know if what the temperature is doing for lots of different reasons. So a lot of different monitoring of ocean water and the ocean conditions. Another thing that's getting really interesting, it's hard to study, but people are very interested in it, is how much fog we're having. Is our fog changing? Are our patterns of coastal fog changing? Because with climate change, we're not really sure which direction fog is going to go. And if the interior heats up more, that might actually cause us to have more coastal fog because it draws more cold air in from the ocean, but there might be some factors that we don't quite understand in those dynamics. So more and more people interested in sort of understanding what's happening with climate change and our fog. You know, a lot of things in Sonoma County depend on that fog. Pinot grapes in particular, you know, a lot of things need that fog. Our coastal prairie needs that fog and that extra water input that it gets. So we're very interested to see how fog changes with climate change. So a lot of the data that we collect with these instruments is available to anyone who needs it or wants it. We have a website set up so people can check the local conditions based on our sensors out there. We have a webcam that looks out the cove, so you can check. I use it all the time to check what the weather's doing before I go out to Bodega Bay. I know a lot of other folks use it for that. A lot of fishermen use it. Fishing community uses it. A lot of recreationists use it. So we have that available on our website. We also provide public access. We have a trail that crosses the reserve. So you can hike from the southern part of state parks on Bodega Head across the reserve out to Salmon Creek Beach or the other way around. And that trail is available and open all the time. We do ask that people stay on the trail because there's a lot of research going on in other areas off that trail. But that is also a place where the public can enjoy and cross over the reserve and can see some of those habitats. I always like to give a shout out to my staff. The reserve has a very small staff. It's just the three of us, but I get to work with Luis Morales. He's the reserve steward. He does a lot of the on the ground work for keeping our habitat in really good condition. And Jackie Soanes. Jackie's been out in the area for almost as long as I have. She's an amazing person. She loves natural history and she's a natural historian extraordinaire. She hosts a blog that if folks don't know about it, you probably should. It's called Bodega Head Blogspot, and you should check it out. She usually posts an observation every day about something that's going on in our area, now related. She also gives amazing tours and talks in the community too, so you might want to look out for that. I'll talk a little bit about the laboratory facilities. I know I'm very focused on the outdoor portions of the reserve, but I'm sure you guys are also interested in the laboratory on site. This laboratory opened in 1965, and it started with one building and has now grown into a pretty extensive facility. One of the big things that make it an important facility is that we have a flow-through seawater system. And we're permitted to have that system, and we have a unique clarifier that pulls water in. It takes a lot of the sediment and other things out of the water, and then we have water that circulates through all the laboratories inside the building so that animals can be brought in from the field and brought into the laboratory and held in their same conditions, in their same temperature of seawater, the same seawater that they would experience out on the coast. So that allows for safe handling and studies of things inside the laboratories, which is really important. Climate change experimental facility is really important. We're looking at all the different ways that climate change and the changing conditions with seawater pH and other things are affecting organisms. We have an imaging facility and an anadromous and pelagic fish facility. We also have pathogen isolation facilities for shellfish studies. Right now, we have a lot of folks looking at abalone, and we are also one of the only facilities permitted to raise the endangered white abalone. So a lot of things going on in there. There's historically been a number of research themes that are being carried out at the laboratory. They span from ecology and evolution to oceanography, ocean health. So looking at ecotoxicology, how toxins in the water affect reproductive health, shellfish health and other things. Also physiology, how do organisms adapt to living in our crazy coastal areas? How do things adapt to being stuck on a rock and having to go through exposure during low tide when it gets really hot, but also these intense wave events and cold water that we have along the coast. A lot of conservation work, a lot of, folks who are doing eelgrass work or doing a lot of conservation work, looking at eelgrass wasting disease, looking at all different sorts of things. I looked at macroalgal blooms in the harbor and how that affects the eelgrass community that's out there. A lot of folks obviously looking at climate change and the effects of ocean acidification and other things. So lots of different topics going on. We have some new faculty that have been, we had sort of some folks retire and other folks leaving. So we have done some recruitment in the last few years. We have 4 new faculty now, 3 of whom are already on site and working, and one of them is going to be joining us in the fall. So we'll have new, interesting, different directions that some of the research will be going. So that's really exciting to see some new faculty coming in. It's always really nice to show some of these older photos. So before the laboratory was even built out on Bodega Head, there were folks coming up from UC Berkeley and other places in the Bodega Bay area. And this is a picture of the very first laboratory that was in Bodega Bay. It was an old beach motel shack where they used to, I think, rent boats out of. And this is down near Port of Bodega. And this is what it looked like inside, very shack-like condition. I'm sure it wasn't very warm in there, but classes would come up and researchers would come up and they would do their experiments in here. We're still doing lots of classes at Bodega. As I mentioned, we have the Marine and Coastal Science major at UC Davis. So we're getting more and more students interested in marine science and having them come out and take really great hands-on classes that are launching them on a research career. So that's really exciting. I thought it was worth mentioning that the Bodega Marine Lab housing can hold about 85 people in total. We have a full dining hall down there. And this is there's two entrances to Bodega Marine Laboratory. The first one that you come upon, which is just past West Side Park Campground. We're on the other side. This is the housing facility that's down there. And this actually was also the location of the ranch in The Birds, if anybody has seen that movie. But we have 2 dorm buildings down there, a full dining hall. We have a graduate student dormitory that holds about 10, and space for visiting researchers and families down there. So it's a pretty rustic setting, but it's really nice that we have housing for people to come and stay at when they're at the laboratory. And we do a lot of public outreach and education too. Of course, it's been quite slow during the pandemic, but we're ramping back up. And there will be some announcements coming soon about when the Friday public tours that are walk-in and available for anyone will start up again. I think we're shooting for April. So those will be instituted back in again. And those are from 2 to 4 on Fridays. Anybody can come up and get a docent-led tour of the laboratory. We also do a lot of events in the community and other places that take organisms out, do educational things, public talks. There's the talk at the restaurant in Bodega Bay to Science Uncorked that the laboratory sponsors every Wednesday night. So lots of different outreach. I'm going to pause here maybe to take if anybody has a couple of questions, and then I'll launch into telling you a little bit about the Marine Protected Areas Collaborative.
I just have a comment, Suzanne. I have been hiking the trail that goes over the reserve and the overlook trail at Bodega for years and years. And although I have seen all those different ecosystems, it's mind-boggling. It just blows my mind to see you list them and itemize them that way. It's really a unique spot in terms of the variety of ecosystems going on just on Bodega Head.
Yes,
it's really remarkable.
It's remarkable, and I didn't really go into it, but we have a lot of different reserves across the natural reserve system for UC, and we're by far not one of the bigger sites, but we're definitely one of the most used sites And part of that is the diversity of habitats that we have. Part of it, of course, is we have a very extensive facility, a laboratory located within. No other reserves in the system have such an extensive facility like that on site, but we're very fortunate to have both of them at Bodega. And it draws a lot of, we're one of the highest used reserves in the system because of that. So,
Sure.
and it's really interesting over time too. I haven't actually graphed it out, but there's been times, if you look over the history of the reserve and what the dominant, whether it's been more dominant that people are studying marine systems or terrestrial systems, but there's been times when it's been much more heavily terrestrial research that's gone on, and then it kind of swings and then it becomes much more marine research oriented. So we're very much in a marine oriented era right now, but we've had some, it depends a lot on what researchers are at Davis, who's got a really active program, where the graduate students want to be. So it's kind of it ebbs and flows. It's very interesting.
Well, you're really uniquely positioned in that respect.
Yeah, it's great. It's always different. Every day is different out there. So I'm not
Beth,
keeping up with the chat, folks.
Beth has her hand raised.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering, UC Davis has the CalNat program, and are you familiar with that? And have you guys ever considered having a on-site CalNat, like for a week there, using your facilities and everything?
Yeah, we thought about it early on. I think when we kind of looked around and saw that other folks in Sonoma County were doing it, we felt like it was sort of getting covered off. And we have at times had them, like a class that was happening somewhere else would come and visit for a day, and we would talk and sort of share some of the things that we know about the reserve. We haven't thought about hosting a class like that ourselves. We have a lot of balls in the air, and I think that was, as long as that was happening in our general area, we felt like it was getting covered. So
Well, I know that the Moss Landing does it. So it's like a week-long class and people live there. And
Yeah.
That to me would be really a great use of your location, since you have the dorm rooms and everything that people could use. And it could be at a time when, you don't have a lot of people there, spring break or something like that. But I certainly would take that class.
Well, it's nice to know. It's also, yes, I mean, we would consider it, but at this point we haven't offered it. We don't also, we're heavily focused on university level education and research. And so we don't have an outreach staff. We have one person who does outreach right now, and she's we've only recently gotten that. So we haven't in the past had the staff to run something like that and to offer something like that. We've partnered, to be able to offer some pieces of that, but we've been a bit staff limited. And we're still very staff limited. And that's one of the reasons why we've been very slow to open back up for public tours, is that the pandemic has been really hard on keeping staff and, having staff. We're trying desperately to hold on to the staff that we have. So it takes a lot of people to do courses like that and to be able to coordinate things like that. So we've been a bit limited, frankly, over the last few years because of the pandemic. And the other, some of the times that you might think would be slow times, we have, we're often at capacity for our housing. Winter might be an opportunity to do that because we have usually a little bit more vacancy during the winter, but springtime is when it's already very heavily used for research. We have classes coming out and researchers are already getting their programs going. So sometimes it's hard to line those things up timing wise because of the research schedules, but that's a good idea. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sonoma MPA Collaborative. In 1999, the Marine Life Protection Area was passed. It was a stakeholder-led process that led to the institution of 124 marine protected areas across California. Those were implemented in 2012, and there's 5 different types of marine protected areas. There's the no-take state marine reserves. There's state marine conservation areas that have limited or no take. There are state marine parks, which also have limited take. State marine recreational management areas, limited or no take, and then special closures. And you can see the different colors, how they're distributed across the state. One of the things I want to emphasize when I talk about marine protected areas is that they are focused on restricting take. So harvesting for, in fisheries or harvesting for any other reasons. National marine sanctuaries, like our Greater Farallon National Marine Sanctuary, are protecting they have a different jurisdiction. They have a different restriction. So the National Marine Sanctuaries are about impacting the seabed floor, protecting against that, protecting against discharge into the waters. So they're kind of, they're protecting different things. I want to make sure I emphasize that. So with 124 marine protected areas across the state, Fish and Wildlife, who is mandated to manage those areas, it's a huge effort. And Fish and Wildlife, it's a big chunk for Fish and Wildlife to manage. So when these went into effect, there were some smart people who had been working down in Southern California who got this idea about the Marine Protected Areas Collaborative. They saw the fact that Fish and Wildlife was going to need help managing these areas. They had too much on their plate. So they said, we know we have a lot of people in California working on coastal issues. Let's pull those folks in to these collaboratives and have them help with managing these marine protected areas. So Calla Allison, who was working down in Orange County with the Orange County Marine Protected Area Council, she kind of took this idea of getting the local nonprofits and agencies and other folks involved in managing the marine protected areas. And she sort of she birthed this idea to have a system of collaboratives across, at least in Southern California at the time. She moved that vision forward. She got some key support early on from the Natural Resources Agency and Fish and Wildlife, and also the Resource Legacy Fund. That's a powerful nonprofit in our state. She established a couple of these collaboratives in Southern California. They were kind of tested them out, and building on the success of those, she proposed to set up collaboratives across the rest of the state. So in 2013, she went up the state and she set up collaboratives pretty much based on county by county for most of the areas. And that was when the collaboratives were all in place along the state. So here we are in Sonoma, and you can see all of the coastal counties, and then San Francisco Bay are included in the collaborative network. So that means there's 14 collaboratives across the state. In total, there's over 600 members for the collaboratives, and over 385 organizations represented in there. And the idea is that they assist in stewarding California's 124 marine protected areas. And the mission of the collaborative network is to empower the coastal communities to advance the marine protected areas management and encourage ocean stewardship. So the collaboratives are pretty focused on marine protected areas, but there is some sort of bleed over into other coastal areas as well. And over the last 10 years, the collaborative network has really come a long way. I was in Sonoma Marine Protected Areas with Michelle Luna from the inception in 2013. And I remember being involved in the meetings about it and pulling together interested people in Sonoma County to kind of be on the collaborative with us. And we kind of looked around for a while and at each other and said, like, okay, what do we do? And it was very grassroots effort. We had some good guidance from Cala and some other folks in the collaborative network, and we kind of, slowly started to think about projects that we could do to help highlight and let people know what marine protected areas are, where they are in Sonoma County, what the benefit of having them in Sonoma County is, and sort of reaching out, particularly because we get a lot of visitors to Sonoma County too, who might come here and have no idea, especially early on, what marine protected areas are and what they can and can't do in marine protected areas. So we did we focused on trying to elevate knowledge about them and to get people to respect them and to sort of flesh out what the marine protected areas mean specifically to Sonoma County. So collaboratives work very much from the grassroots level. We work, anybody who sort of has an investment in the coastal area is invited to join. It's, people sort of come and go on the collaborative. And we get, we can sort of focus on what we want to in Sonoma County, but we also get some really good guidance and ideas from the collaborative network team. Cala Allison is still the of the collaborative network, which is wonderful. She has a lot of experience and she's working with these collaboratives all up and down the state. So she can help us cross-pollinate ideas with collaboratives from other areas. It's taught me a lot about the other parts of California coast, which are very different from us. I every time I go to a collaborative wide meeting where there's a lot of people from Southern California, I come back to Sonoma County and thank my lucky stars that I live here and not there. We have issues that the Southern California folks are dealing with because of the population densities that we don't have to worry about as much. So I feel blessed that way. But there's a lot of things for the collaborative network. We are recognized by the Marine Protected Areas statewide leadership team as an important part of managing the marine protected areas in California. So that's really cool. That's what this diagram kind of talks about is, we have this very grassroots collection of agencies and nonprofits and community members and fishing community and tribal members and other things, other groups here at this very grassroots level, but we're actually providing two-way communication with these agencies and other folks who are mandated with the management of these areas and who are doing a lot of policy work and enforcement of what's happening in the MPAs. So that's really interesting and been very cool to see that we have a vehicle to really get some information to the agencies and they use us to get the information back out to a lot of our community. We are recognized in an MPA partnership plan. That's a document that sort of codifies the fact that the collaboratives are important to the management of these areas. So it's, the collaboratives are taken seriously and their input is definitely considered. The things that we've focused on providing in our collaborative, we help to host MPA compliance forums and reports. So we help to get together and the enforcement folks who are out there dealing with poaching and other things in the marine protected areas, we help to get them together every year or every couple of years to talk about any changes that are happening, where the problem areas are, how we might be able to help with educational material or signage so that it helps to make their jobs easier. We've produced videos that are widely distributed to help explain what the marine protected areas are, talk about some of the unique things that are happening in Sonoma County around the marine protected areas. We help to produce brochures and informational booklets. We provide educational resources, training materials, posters and signs. And there's some online activities and apps that the collaborative network has worked on. Excuse me. We're really trying to help in those areas, really help support the marine protected areas, help to educate and but also provide feedback back to the agencies about what's happening in our local areas, because we are the eyes on the water in a lot of cases. So you guys are probably aware, but we have a number of MPAs within Sonoma County. I just wanted to highlight what those were. And then I've already talked a little bit about how the National Marine Sanctuary protects different things than the marine protected areas, but they are layered, they are both in existence in a lot of these coastal areas. I wanted to give a shout out to Justin Lindenberg. He stepped in after Michelle retired as fellow co-chair of the Sonoma Marine Protected Areas Collaborative, and Hollis has also assisted and shared that role. I have been on also a co-chair since 2013, but I'm sort of stepping down and making some space for some fresh ideas to come in. So we're looking for another new co-chair to be added to Sonoma Marine Protected Areas. If you know of anybody who's interested, please let us know. Let Justin know.
Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm gonna wrap up here in just a couple minutes. I haven't been watching the time, but I'm almost finished. I wanted to highlight that in Sonoma County, there are some unique things about Sonoma County when we think about marine protected areas that sort of help to guide us, or we take into account when we are thinking about how do we best support our marine protected areas in Sonoma County. We have a lot of visitors that come to the Sonoma Coast. It's a beautiful place. People want to come and enjoy the ocean. So over 4 million visitors annually. I think that went way up during the pandemic. And I don't know if it's still way up or has kind of leveled off a little bit after the pandemic, but we had a lot of people coming out to the coast, a lot of people who want to enjoy the coastal areas. So we have that factor to take into account. We have a commercial fishing fleet. We have Bodega Harbor, a lot of commercial fishing come out of Bodega Harbor. And that's had a long history as well. We have a University of California reserve and laboratory within our county. We have Native American tribes who have historically been stewards of these areas and who are federally recognized, and a lot of stewardship for these areas. We have the Greater Fairlands National Marine Sanctuary. We have the Fort Ross Historical Site. We also have a Coast Guard station, and we have a lot of agriculture between the ranching and wine industry that is something we take into consideration for our coast. This is the general roster of our collaborative members currently. A lot of nonprofits that operate in the area. Of course, also the agencies and other folks. And I'll just talk briefly about a few of the projects that we've done so far in the collaborative. One of the first things we did was to work on a public outreach campaign using short videos. The first one we produced, which is Why Does Sonoma County Need Marine Protected Areas, was meant to sort of be a public service announcement. It's about a 1-minute, really beautiful video that talks about, we wanted to give an idea of both show these amazing places that we have within the coast in Sonoma County, but also convey the information of marine protected areas aren't just places where we're telling you not to do something. They're actually places where you can do a lot of things, but we are also protecting the resources within. So that's what that video was meant to do. We also made one, there's a lot of school groups that come out and and want to come and explore tide pools out on the coast. So we made a video that talks about how to come out and enjoy the tide pools safely, both for their own personal safety, but also for the safety of the critters that live out in the tide pools. So that's a video that, for example, teachers can show in their classroom before they come out to do field trips out to the coast. We also did this is a beautiful video that we did. And when I say we, I really mean the filmmakers that we hired to do it, not me. I got to work on the project with them, but they are really responsible for the creativity and the beautiful film. We wanted to highlight the Kashaya Pomo. They recently were able to establish the Kashaya Coastal Reserve north of Bodega Bay along the coast. And we wanted to tell a little bit of the story of why that's so important for their tribe and its members. So that's what that video is about. And then the fourth video is about our long history of fishing in Sonoma County and how that interacts and is affected by the marine protected areas. So that's a really nice tribute to the commercial fishing community, and sharing some information about, some of the uncertainty that the fishing community has to deal with in the way they're trying to make their living. So those are available on the Sonoma Marine Protected Areas, the Marine Protected Area Collaborative site, if anyone wants to take a look at those. The more recent project that the collaborative did was to pilot an idea of putting these programmable traffic signs out along the coast at areas in Sonoma County that really get a lot of that visitor pressure at different times of the year, and remind them that they're recreating within marine protected areas, and they should really respect the wildlife, stay back. And if they wanted to learn more, the website for the marine protected areas at wildlife.ca.gov. And we, as part of the pilot project for that, some of the folks who do the Beach Watch program were actually taking surveys to see if these signs were having an effect on people's behavior when they were at the coast. So that was one of the projects that the collaborative did recently. So I think I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions.
I just wanted to mention that the MPA also has a tide pool working group that's just sort of getting off the ground, and also an estuary working group. And if anybody is interested in being involved in either of those, we can get you connected. And also a newly funded climate initiative that is just now starting. So let us know if you're interested in any of these. Thank you, Suzanne. Are there any questions? Suki says we would love that sign back. Marine protected areas, stay back from wildlife.
I saw a question in the chat. I'm not sure I answered it well. Where I dove to look at the reef was right here. So I did a research dive where we swam out of the cove, and we're on this reef out here, but in the the lower subtidal part of it. And that's where this whole where you see the rocks here in the rocky intertidal, this reef extends down into the subtidal a decent way. And the communities out here on the rocks, the subtidal community, is really spectacular. And I assume, although it's much more dangerous to dive out here, all along Bodega Head, where there's that rocky subtidal, is, I'm sure, equally beautiful and diverse. A lot of this rocky intertidal area that we have along our shoreline is actually de facto marine protected area, even before they put the MPA in, because you can't get to it. You can't get to it safely, either by land or by boat or by scuba. It's just, our coast is so has such high wave energy, and the conditions are so rarely calm that you could safely get to any of those areas, that it's protected by nature itself.
Do you have photographs of that subtidal area where you were diving, Suzanne?
I didn't take photos during the dive, but I'm sure we can find similar photos from similar places that show that diversity.
It'd be a wonderful program.
Yeah, it would.
Together. Yeah.
There's also a fascinating history of Bodega Head and where the lab is itself, with military, I believe, before it was owned by the UC, which is there is a real fascinating history to the coastline, conservation efforts and otherwise, and something that we'd love to dive more deeply into at a future date.
Yeah, both from, it was a practice artillery range, the part of state parks and part of our property in the 1940s was part of an practice artillery range out there. I know that there's some interesting, subtitle charts that show some dangerous things out there. I don't know quite what those are. And then, of course, when PG&E came in and thought it was a good idea to put a atomic power plant on a major fault line, that history of that story is so fascinating. So yeah, lots of really interesting history. That would take another 4 hours, I think. dig into that.
It's quite a hub you're at there.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing more about it with everyone.
Yeah,
Yes, thank
I
you,
apologize
Suzanne.
that my voice has not been the best this afternoon. I'm just still getting over that cold, so I hope everything was clear.
It was. Thank you so much.